executive director of the Arizona Republican Party. Safston is now one of the 18 defendants in Arizona accused of helping to organize the meeting of the fake electors and serving as a fake elector himself. Similarly, Arizona's indictment lays out the extensive pressure campaign to coerce this man, Rusty Bowers, who was then the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, to call a special session to unlawfully appoint the Trump electors. Soon after the election, Bowers said that he was, quote, getting hundreds of emails demanding that I do my constitutional duty and name electors that will vote for Trump, end quote. The Arizona indictment also alleges that in the weeks after the election, no fewer than 6 of the defendants contacted Bowers either privately or publicly on social media to get him to cooperate. Georgia's indictment completes that picture. It adds that Trump was also part of that pressure campaign. He called Bowers at least twice during that same time frame, including once on or around Christmas Day, to try to get him on board with this unlawful plan. Bowers, however, told the president, I voted for you, I worked for you, I campaigned for you, I just won't do anything illegal for you. Joining me now, Jill Wine-Banks, former Assistant Watergate Special Prosecutor and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast and author of Watergate Girl, My Fight for Truth and Justice Against a Criminal President. And Charles Coleman Jr. is a former prosecutor in Brooklyn, New York, a civil rights attorney. He's the host of the Charles Coleman podcast. Both Jill and Charles are MSNBC legal analysts, and you'll often see Charles in here because otherwise I'd never be able to get out on the road. Thank you to you, friends, for being with us this morning. Jill, let me start with this concept of, I want to talk about the Georgia case for a second, because there were these 161 instances in that charge in which it says this act was done in the furtherance of the conspiracy. And this is important because the individual things that happened in Michigan or in Arizona or in Pennsylvania or in Wisconsin may not have looked like an effort to completely overturn the election, but it becomes clearer and clearer with each passing week that there was actually a plan to overturn the election and that Trump allies and lawyers were intimately involved in it.
It is all very important to keep in mind. I think you used the word the web of crimes. And that's what all of these combined show. The sum total of the individual parts is much greater than any one of the individual parts. There is a real picture that the American voter should be getting from all of these indictments about how widespread the attempt to take down the election was, of how close we came to losing our votes, from not having them counted, from having a coup by maybe lawful means. And so I think, actually, they aren't even close to lawful. Let me take that back. I didn't mean to say it. It's not true. These were totally illegal means, and all of them come together. There is repetition because Georgia alleges the same type of things that Michigan and Arizona do. And we're going to really have a great revelation when all of these cases finally get to trial, assuming that the Supreme Court doesn't dilly-dally too much longer.
Right. And interestingly enough, in Arizona, Donald Trump's immunity doesn't apply because he's an unindicted co-conspirator. Charles, let's just talk about this. And I think Jill makes an important point. We're going to have some revelations. Some of us had them when we've read the earlier indictments. But one of the ones that I had was that I thought after the election of 2020 that it was sort of a bunch of disorganized, bumbling fools who might have overturned the election if they could have, but really didn't have the capabilities. And now everything I see shows how organized this was. This started as a maybe we'll win an audit or a case somewhere, and then we'll be prepared to move forward with the Trump presidency. That wasn't what this was. This is an actually let's deceive people into saying that Donald Trump won the electoral votes in this state. Let's get people to sign documents to say that they're the electors. Let's send those documents to the archives and Congress. This is much more serious than it looked like at first blush.
No, you're absolutely right, Ali. Unfortunately, what the work of the prosecutors across the country has revealed is this very large conspiracy to actually overturn the election. And I know that that sounds like something that we've heard before, but when you understand the interconnectivity of each of these parts that Jill was just discussing, you really get a sense of how wide and how far they were prepared to go in their efforts here. Now, when you talk about what is unearthed, what I find interesting, even though this is a legal conversation, it really should be very illuminating for the electorate, because right now Donald Trump functions in a space of being both a defendant and a candidate. But when you're looking at this huge scheme that expands throughout the entire nation in terms of different states and false electoral slates and what they were going to do, you have to understand what that means for who he was as a candidate. So if there's any area for which this should be an enlightenment, it should be for the electorate who is now going to make a decision about him as a candidate.
So that goes back to the point that Jill made, about we're going to find this very illuminating. We're going to see some revelations. But really, I think more importantly, not more importantly, but differently than the courts and the legal system coming to these revelations, what has to happen for Americans to understand that now it's in many cases the same group of people, or at least there are duplicates of these people charged in various places. This was all a real thing. This is not random prosecutors around the country going rogue. They all have the same evidence, the same texts, the same phone calls, the same recordings, and the same testimony.
The real problem is that there's a group of people in America who refuse to understand and see and accept facts. The things alleged in all of these indictments are facts. There are, as you mentioned, there are texts, there are emails, there are phone calls. Those are evidence, they are facts. And there's obviously a group of people who are loyal to Trump who simply refuse to accept that. But I do believe that jurors will accept it. And then I think that voters will be swayed by the fact that there will be convictions. So all of this depends on getting these cases to trial in time for it to be something that can influence how voters perceive the two candidates, or at least this one candidate. So I think we have to just, again, go back to these cases have to go to trial. We have the New York case going, and the evidence coming out is very strong and is being put together in a way that builds a framework that will be filled in with details and with corroboration from documents. That will lead a jury charged with the responsibility of voting for guilt or innocence based on the evidence in that courtroom, not on their preconceived notions. And jurors take that charge very, very seriously. We've had a MAGA juror in the Manafort case who said, I love Donald Trump, I love Manafort, but I had to vote on the evidence, and that made me vote to convict on all counts. I'm hoping the same will be true in the New York jury and any future juries.
Charles, the judge in Nevada said that the 6 people charged in that state, that trial's not going to happen until January of 2025. Now, I don't know whether whatever the Supreme Court does has an influence on what goes on in the cases in Michigan and in Arizona, where Donald Trump is he's an unnamed co-conspirator. He's an unindicted co-conspirator. Does his immunity have any effect on the cases in which he's not named as a co-conspirator?
It doesn't. It doesn't really affect him in that respect. Because he's not charged. And I think that that's one of the things that being an unindicted co-conspirator affords you in terms of the protection that is given by that designation. It has less to do with his immunity status as per the Supreme Court and more to do with the fact that for various reasons, prosecutors chose in those cases not to indict him.
But is one of those reasons the fact that those cases can go forward regardless of what the Supreme Court decides?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, I think when you're talking about a co-conspirator who's unindicted, there are various reasons why you might not choose to do that. And as a former prosecutor, some of them may be that, you might be looking to flip someone. You might be looking to get additional information. Obviously, that's not going to be the case here. No one is expecting Donald Trump to sort of flip on his co-conspirators, although it would not be surprising in this world at this point. But I think that part of the strategy here that prosecutors have employed, you're absolutely right, is that they want to make sure that regardless of what happens with him, regardless of whether he ultimately ascends to 1600 Pennsylvania again as the commander-in-chief, whether he is granted presidential immunity by the Supreme Court, that their prosecution and preserving the integrity of these cases remains unchecked. And that's what they sort of have made the decision and the tough call to use him as a unindicted co-conspirator in these cases so that their prosecutions can move forward unfettered.
Jill, I got to ask you what the pin is today.
Well, you've actually made 2 references. You said it was a busy week and that there was some bumbling going on. It's a busy bee It has been a very, very busy week. And if I could just add, unindicted co-conspirator is a big advantage to the prosecutor because anything that Donald Trump says or said can be used against his co-conspirators because that's the law. If you're a co-conspirator, your statements are admissible against everybody. And we named Nixon an unindicted co-conspirator because the special prosecutor would not let us indict him despite the evidence, but agreed that we could give a roadmap to impeachment to the Judiciary Committee, that he felt that impeachment was a better solution for the sitting president. That wasn't true once he resigned and was an ordinary citizen. He should have, Nixon that is, should have been indicted then.
Thank you to both of you. Wonderful seeing you both and having you both on the show. Jill Wine-Banks is a former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and co-host of the #Sisters-in-Law podcast. Charles Coleman Jr. Is a former prosecutor in Brooklyn, New York. He's the host of the Charles Coleman podcast. They're both MSNBC legal analysts and great friends of the show. Still ahead, I'll continue our discussion about free speech with two authors who removed their novels from consideration at the PEN America Literary Awards over the organization's messaging about the war in Gaza. Don't miss the rest of this conversation. But first, Donald Trump's possible plan to do away with the independence of the nonpartisan Federal Reserve should raise alarm bells for every American. If elected, he could have unprecedented power to manipulate the economy. You're watching Velshi.
My frequent heartburn had me taking antacid after antacid all day long. But with Prilosec OTC, just one pill a day blocks heartburn for a full 24 hours. For one-and-done heartburn relief, Prilosec OTC, one pill a day, 24 hours, zero heartburn.
Liberty Mutual customized my car insurance and I saved hundreds.
That's great.
I know, I've been telling everyone.
Liberty. Liberty.
How many people did you tell?
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, liberty, liberty. Liberty.
Oh, what a good time we will have. You can make it happen, girl.
Try dietary supplements from Voltaren for healthy joints.
Help that animal, then this is that moment. Because there is an animal suffering right now, waiting for help. And we simply can't get to them without more support from people like you. But helping is easier than you ever imagined. Just visit this website, call this number,